We're talking today with Don Conyers of Byron Center, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, so Don, we'll begin in the beginning. Where and when were you born?
May 29th, 1949 in Atlanta, Georgia, at Emory University Hospital.
All right. And then did your family live in Atlanta or outside of it?
We lived in a little area around Buford, Flowery Branch. It's about 60 miles north of downtown. Back in the old days, it was slow, about an hour to get to town, but once they put the interstate in, it's faster.
Okay. And what was your family doing for a living when you were a kid?
My dad was a mechanic. He had his own little shop, and my mom was a school teacher for about 30 years.
All right. Okay. And so you're in high school, and Vietnam was heating up. Were you paying much attention to that?
I graduated from high school in '67.
Yes.
To be honest, I wasn't paying a whole lot of attention. I knew about it, but I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. I'm trying to think. When I graduated, I went that summer quarter to Middle Georgia College to get some credits. And I got down there, I got sick and had to drop out. So I had to try to find a job, and that was kind of hard being a brand new graduate. My mom had a friend that in her Sunday school class, and she worked at the draft board, and she said that I was coming up for July on the draft board for the draft.
Mm-hmm.
And when Mom told me that, I was like, okay. And then I got to thinking about it. We've got family going back to the Civil War, actually on both sides, because my dad was originally from Kentucky, and there was some of the Kentucky clan of Conyers that actually fought for the North.
Mm-hmm.
My mom's side of the family was Alabama and Georgia, so they were all, but going all the way back. My dad was in World War II. My granddad was in World War I. And I thought, I don't think I should be made to serve this country. It's an honor. And so June 26th, I didn't run right down there then, but June 26th, I went down and joined. I wanted to be in armor, the cavalry, because my dad was.
Mm-hmm.
And he used to tell stories about, he was actually with the unit when they dismounted horses in 1938 at Fort Knox. It was his first Cavalry Regiment, and he used to talk about he went from a horse cavalry scout to a Harley Davidson scout because they went to motorcycles. And I've got a big, one of those full width regimental pictures of all the guys with the motorcycles in when they begin to mechanize the Army. And I thought, well, I just want to serve in that unit too. And it's the oldest regiment of cavalry. It was first called the Regiment of Dragoons. And dragoons were what they call cavalry in Europe, basically a soldier that can fight mounted or dismounted with rifle, pistol, or saber. And they were formed in 1833, Jefferson Barracks, Missouri. Real proud of that.
So that becomes the first cavalry regiment.
Yes, it becomes the first cavalry regiment. Actually, the first commander was Colonel Fremont, and they opened the Santa Fe Trail, and Fremont, California is named for him. Mm-hmm. And they did that mission in the 1840s.
Yes. Okay.
I like that history part mm-hmm. of the culture.
Okay. And now, did they promise you that you could go into armor, or did they just say, well, we'll see?
No, I enlisted with that option.
Okay.
So I really thought I was going to go to Germany.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because we had a large concentration in Europe at the time with the Soviet Union. And I was really excited at that. Went to basic at Fort Benning.
Okay. Now, when do you get to Fort Benning?
I went in on the 26th, swore the oath. That night, they put us on a Greyhound bus to Fort Benning.
Okay.
We got down there about 1 o'clock in the morning and walked us through a door, and on the other side of the door we started getting shots, both arms. We were in the reception station for about 4 days, got our uniforms and got all our hair cut off, and then they put us in what we called a cattle car. It's like a cattle trailer, except it's got benches to sit down in. Drove us over to the training area, and then for the next 2 months I was at Fort Benning, and in basic training. And our drill sergeants, mine was a veteran of the 1st Cav Air Mobile that was in the big battle.
Drang Valley, yeah.
Yes, and he had a big scar down this way, and when he talked, he sounded like this, and he didn't have a lot of volume, and it was funny. After the first day, when he got talking, people would hold their breath to hear what he was saying. We were afraid of him. He's a great guy. He's a great drill sergeant.
All right. Now, what do they actually do with you in basic training? So once they get you started,
in theory, or the concept, is knock the civilian out of you and make you a soldier. So many people, it's really hard for them to be a member of one cog in the wheel. They all want to be the leader, or they want to be in the back, but they need to be in this position. So you start off with basic maneuvers, marching, that kind of stuff, listening for commands. You do all your initial rifle marksmanship. Everybody does it, even if you're going to not do weapons in the military. But it's to make you part of a team. In college now, they have these massive practices that's intense, and a lot of teams beat each other up worse than the game itself. It's kind of that way. As you progress in there, eventually you're in a squad. Student basic trainees become leaders. I was
don't hit your microphone, please.
Sorry. I was picked as a squad leader, and the drill sergeant fired a couple of platoon guides. That was like the platoon sergeant, and I got moved to that, and I finished the last 4 weeks as a platoon guide, which got me a stripe when we left basic. So I got promoted to E2. And that kind of helped me get on a road toward leadership, because after basic, and I may be jumping ahead here, when I got to Fort Knox, which is where they teach armor, that's the center of armor, there was 4 of us that were all going to be tankers, and we all planned that we'd go to Germany together. They pulled me out and sent me to a 2-week, they called it Leader Prep Course, LPC, because I'd been a leader in basic. And those guys went on to AIT and left. So all of a sudden, my 3 companions were gone. But at that point, I still thought I was going to Europe. But at the end of AIT, I got another stripe. I was now PFC because of being a leader during AIT. And AIT is where they teach you the tanks and how to shoot them and how to maintenance. A lot of maintenance and radios and all those things.
All right. So just to back up a little bit, I mean, one of the basic questions I ask is, how easy or hard was it for you to adjust to life in the military and basic training? But it sounds like you took to it fairly well.
Yeah, I mean, I liked it. It was my dad was an alcoholic.
Okay.
He was not a violent guy, but he would get frustrated with me. And so I learned to take orders pretty good. Mom being a school teacher also. And where I grew up, you paid attention to adults. Just shut up and do what they say, And I had no problem with that. And I wanted to be the best I could be. And I wasn't picked off right off the top for any of those. But as they got rid of the guys they thought were going to be, like there were some ROTC guys from high school that were put in leadership position that didn't make it. They just I was next man up, and I just did the best I could.
Okay.
And basic and AIT is very organized. You know where you're at, you know what you're fixing to do, you know the end result of that, and then there's graduation. I graduated from AIT.
Well, within AIT, what kind of vehicles were you working with?
The tanks were M48 A2s. They were gas powered. Basically, in World War II, the Sheridan tank, the M4, and those, they were all gas powered.
It was a Sherman tank in World War II.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sheridan is what we used some of those in Vietnam later on. But,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. They were all gas powered, and then as we got out of World War II, they came out with the M47 right at the end of it was also gas powered. All the World War II, all the German stuff was diesel.
Yeah.
And see, we as a country had not embraced diesel. So all the older tanks were what we trained on, because the active force had just gone to the M60s, which had diesels, and a bigger gun, 105 millimeter versus the 90.
Yeah.
And then they did the 60A1 and A2 and stuff. When I got to Vietnam, the M48s were A3s that had diesel packs. Still had the 90 millimeter gun, and a few other little changes, like the 50 cal for the commander's cupola was inside of it, and it's primarily to shoot up any air. Well, over there you couldn't depress it very much in that cupola, so they took them out, welded a mount on top of it, and you could shoot the front fenders off if you weren't paying attention.
Okay. And as far as, so the M48s that you're using back at Fort Knox, those are not what people would use if they're going over to Europe, because they're the older model.
Right.
But my understanding is that in Vietnam, they decided the M60 was just physically too heavy to drive around, and so they used the M48s.
And they had a lot of M48s because it was made in that transition that included Korea.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of M48s. So a lot of those, they just shipped it to Vietnam and modified it, put a pack in it that was diesel, and a few little changes. What we call the pack was the engine and the transfer case. It was a cross drive thing, so that you turn the little steering wheel and you could actually turn around in one spot. All of that was put together. The laterals were gone out of a tank, which is what they had in World War II.
All right.
But it's a good tank. I mean, it got a lot of stuff done.
Okay. All right. So when do you finish AIT?
Right before Christmas, because I had a 10-day Christmas leave. Went back home, bought a hot rod car, a Barracuda, 69 Barracuda, would be worth a ton now. Drove it back up to Fort Knox, and when I got up there, I was in another leader course, except this was related to cavalry scouts. It was a scout course. And of course, when I got up there, they locked my car in the yard. I was a trainee again, and it was sitting there, and I could see it. It was yellow. And but I went through that, and when we finished that, that would have been early March, and I came down for orders to go to Vietnam. And initially, they had me scheduled to go to 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, the ones with the Sheridans. I took my leave. I got caught in some bad weather coming back, missed a day, and they charged me a day of bad time. Even though I called them and said, "Hey, I'm stuck. I'm staying at a little hotel here because of the roads." But they said, "We're going to ship you to Vietnam." I went back on leave, and that was the very end of February, first parts of March. And then from Georgia, a family, a guy at our church was a Navy captain, pilot, and he was still in the reserve. And when the church knew I was going to Vietnam, so they prayed for me a lot. And he came up and said, how'd you like for me to fly you out to California? And I was like, yeah, cool. So we met him at the Navy Air Station up in Marietta, Dobbins area of Atlanta, and Mom and my little brother and my dad were up there. And my brother he was 3 years younger than me, so I was 18. He was just kind of, you know. My mom just bawling, crying, and my dad, I hugged him and told him I had to go, and I gave my dad a big old hug, and when he pulled back, it's the first time I ever saw a tear on his face. And I thought about that a lot while we were flying out there, because when he was in World War II, he was never in an American unit. He got shipped out of Fort Knox in 1940 on secret orders to England, and there over to the Soviet Union to teach the Lend-Lease thing. He was a teacher for the Russians on their weapons and equipment. He stayed with them into mid of 41 when the Germans were tearing up a lot of Russia. They pulled him out of there and sent him by way of Burma to North Africa, and he finished his service in World War II with the British 8th Army because of the Lend-Lease thing and him being an instructor in weapons and stuff. And I can remember some of his stories, and I think a lot of that came back to him that it was going to happen to me too. I flew with Captain Brannon, who was the gentleman, and I got to fly in a P-2V Neptune, which is old sub chaser. It looks like a bomber. It's got a big stinger on the back, and he let me fly down in the nose, and that was quite an adventure. And when we laid over at an Air Force base there in Texas, I got sleep in officers' quarters, you know, and I was at E4 and got to sleep in officers' quarters. And then we loaded up, and he took us in, and we went out over the ocean, and I'm like, what's going on? And he turned around to come back and land in California. We were there at the processing center where they issued us all our jungle fatigues and so forth.
Was that in Oakland or somewhere else?
It was in, yeah, it was in that area.
Yeah.
When we got finished there, and one little note that I always thought was kind of interesting for everybody, when we got there, they made us give up our field jackets. You're going to Vietnam, you're not going to need them. Bull. Central Highlands of Vietnam, when the sun goes down, it's cold. But they put us on a bus that had bars on the windows and all blacked out, and we went to the airfield, and we flew into Alaska for refuel, and then we flew out of there and were supposed to go straight across to Vietnam, but we had one of the engines on the airplane messed up, so we landed in Japan. They took the plane into this big warehouse, and there was a big aircraft warehouse next to it with, I don't know, 500 seats maybe, and every vending machine I've ever seen in my life. And they kept us all right in there. We didn't. It had bathrooms and all that. Had a couple of televisions, but everything was Japanese. And then they got the plane going. We went back, loaded up, and I never forget that quiet ride from Japan to Vietnam. Some guys were sleeping, but most were just like and some guy way up front said, "There it is," when we got back over land there. And everybody like, we landed in Long Bend, and we were there for about 4 or 5 days. Big warehouse, and had this big railing up, and Guy'd get up there and he'd say, "I'm from the 1st Division." And he'd call off these 8 or 10 or 12 names, and he'd point, he'd say, "Meet Sergeant so-and-so over here at this door." And we were sitting on our duffel bags. Guys would get up, and go over there, and they'd introduce another one. And we were fairly close to the end, and they said, "The following soldiers," and they called my name, "are going to the 4th Division." And I was like, oh. Because I was talking to, at the reception station where we got our uniforms and stuff, they were also bringing guys back. And I heard guys talking about, said, "Well, don't go to the 4th Division. They just got their butts kicked." So when I heard 4th Division, I was like, uh-oh. We put me on a helicopter, and a lot of people have no idea, but Vietnam is kind of the distance from the north and to the south is about the distance from Savannah, Georgia to the tip of Florida. Okay, to give you a perspective. And we flew 200 miles in a Huey. It was 4 of us going to the 4th Division. And most people that have never been in a Huey, you get that, the way the blades work, you get this little up and down vibration, and after all of that distance, you get out and you're walking and you're going like this. They hustled us off the helicopters and took us to a unit there, and for 4 days you got used to the weather and did this. First time I ever fired an M16 was in country, because in basic we had M14s. And then when I was at Fort Knox, we had 45 pistols and M3 grease gun machine guns. That was the tanker's weapons.
Right.
And all of a sudden I'm introduced to an M16 and whatnot. And then they parsed us out, and like I said, then my orders had been modified to go to the 1st Cavalry Regiment, 2nd Squadron, was attached to the 4th Division.
Okay.
On Highway 19, which is right up from where that big early battle in Vietnam that we were soldiers was making. We actually came through there and passed some of the wreckage from that big ambush. The French got ambushed. They just pushed off the side of the road. So, and that went back to the 50s, and it was still some of it there. When we, May 29th, like I said, it's my birthday, we got orders we were pulling out of Central Highlands. Black Hawk Firebase was up there, and 1st Cav is Black Hawks. We road marched down to Conyers, which is right on the coast, which is about 70 miles. And part of that was that windy part where the French got whacked. We got into Conyers, they surveyed all our equipment, and a lot of tanks got swapped out for newer, fresher tanks and equipment. We were there for about 4 days, and then they put all the tanks and the 113s, the personnel carriers, ACAVs, on these roll-off ships. 2 guys from each crew, a driver and a commander, stayed on the boat. The rest of us, they flew down to Fantillette, which is about 200 miles south, or maybe, I'd say it was about 75 to 100 miles north of Saigon and that area. And we opened up a area on Highway 1, QL 1, that the last time foreign troops were there were the French, and had a they spread the fire bases between Fan Thiet and Fan Rang, which was about 70 miles. And we were being in B Troop, we were in a little village called Longson that had been a Special Forces place. We had an Irvin unit there, except we called them rough puffs, regional provisional soldiers, which was kind of like, if to compare it to the National Guard that were there. And you never 100% trusted them because they had the main gate to the little fire base. And when we first got in there, we couldn't make any changes to the other part. We didn't have pits for the tanks and that kind of stuff. July the 7th, 1969, we got hit by an NVA regiment. We got our butts kicked. We lost 8 guys, and almost everybody in there got hurt or beat up. We were down to M16s and pistols.
Okay, so you weren't able to use the tanks, or?
Oh, we fired everything that we had. The wire that was there had been so compromised that sappers just came through like it wasn't there. And the tank we had had a bad transmission, so we had spent about a day and a half pulling the back deck with a M88, which is a big retriever for tanks, and we had put a new pack in it. We just didn't have the final drives hooked up to the sprockets, so it couldn't move, but the engine would run, charge the batteries. And we were working after the sun went down, which you didn't ever really want lights on, but we were trying to get finished. We cut those off. We had put some engineer stakes on the track and pull a big tarp on it, and we had our cots. We had new cots. See, we slept on those, and I can remember hearing a bang. The Irvins had a 4-deuce mortar in their part, and they would fire that with illumination every now and then. But this was a different boom. And I remember sitting up and looking kind of across the motor pool area, and I saw dirt fly up, and then another boom. And I realized we were getting mortared. We got all up in the tank. And with flashes, you could, as we turned the turret around, you could see they were carrying satchel charges, running around and throwing them. They threw them in the maintenance bunker, the chow hall, as it were, the supply bunker, and they were all blown up. The CP took a big blast. We got our butts kicked because they didn't want us to come in and change everything. After that, they said, and we had combat engineers come down. They dug pits for the tanks, and it much better and new wire.
Okay, but when the sappers are coming in, they didn't have anything they could use to knock out a tank with?
Oh yeah, they had RPGs and stuff. And with but the first level of those guys was to blow up ammo and anything like that. If you're in an armored unit and you get shot at, what are you going to do? You're going to get in that tank or in that personnel carrier. My platoon sergeant, Sergeant Stevens, he was about 4 months from retiring. Our platoon leader had rotated out, and we didn't have the new platoon leader, so he was actually on the platoon leader's track, and I was the gunner on the platoon sergeant's tank. So with him off, I became the TC, tank commander. And because we were sitting out there, they were not coming right up at us, but we could see them running with the illumination and the booms and the fires. And so we fired main gun stuff and everything in the fire base. My platoon sergeant got killed going back into that personnel carrier because it got a satchel charge. And he pulled 2 kids out, went back for the 3rd guy, and another one hit, and he died that night. And it was pretty traumatic.
Yeah. Did the Vietnamese just at some point leave as it got light, or they just did as much damage they thought they could?
We had a cav platoon, had 3 tanks, 4 scout vehicles that were 113s, of what we called the infantry track, which is another 113.
Yeah.
So we just made another ACAV out of it, and a mortar track. We had an 81, and we put out a lot of firepower. And we found the next day, actually the next couple of days, a lot of blood trails, and we actually found a 6-foot tall Asian man dead in the wire. And when that got reported up, the headquarters sent down some MI types, military intelligence guys, and it turned out after they did the research, he was a major in the Red Chinese Army as an advisor.
Yeah.
And they had taken most all of their wounded out, but they missed him and a couple others. And so we got our guys out. The scariest part was the 3 or so hours till the sun came up after the medevacs had left, and none of the ground mounted stuff from the other fire bases had made it down, because they were just running the trails to get to us. It was kind of creepy because there was 5 of us, and we had M16s and pistols. Nothing bigger than that, because all the ammo was shot. Learned a lot of lessons there, changed a lot of things. We got new wire. There was a lot of claymores in the wire. It was pretty scary.
Yeah. All right. Now, once you're at that base, were you going out and patrolling the area, or what were you doing?
Oh yeah. We ran missions out of there. From there, almost, and we were only 10 clicks from the ocean. And we made scout missions and attacks and stuff all the way to where you could see Cambodia. We couldn't fire anything over there, but we had a lot of, we did air mobile stuff, long recon. We'd have a squad of guys, 6 or 8 guys, and they'd fly us, because Cav Squadron had a helicopter troop that was based in Fantillette of Hueys, Cobras, and we had a Chinook company that had heavy lift if we needed that. And so cavalry scouts, and a lot of times before they would send us to do a big mission, we'd fly out, dismount, go through the jungle like a grunt, and observe, especially trails where resupply was coming down. And we'd look to see what kind of activity and stuff. And we found old water buffaloes that had harnesses where they had packed them in. There was even elephants that had harnesses on them that had been just abandoned because the guys got their gear off and took off. And one particularly interesting, if you remember the old wagon train movies, when they would stop for the night, they would log her up. That's that term. They'd circle around, so if the Indians attack. Well, we do that with our vehicles. So when we were dismounted, we would get in a spot where we had a little bit of a fire range, where we could see a little bit around us, and we'd lay down on our bellies with our M16s up like this, and we'd go to sleep in that circle, weapons out, and we had 2 Prick 77 radios that would pass around every couple hours, so that everybody get a little sleep. And you didn't talk. You get a tiny little signal from headquarters that was monitoring us, and you give them 2 clicks if everything is all right. Just break squelch. That way, if Charlie was right over there, he's not going to hear you talking. And we were out at this one particular time. Have you ever been to the zoo and heard a tiger that kind of in his throat? We heard that. It was real low at first, and I was awake during that, and I thought, what is that? And I looked over at my buddy next to me, and he was, and nobody seemed to move around. And then a little bit, it was louder, and several guys woke up, and you hear the click, click, full automatic now. Take it off safe. That tiger walked all the way around us that night. He could smell us. He knew we were potential food, but you couldn't tell how big we were. And he walked around, and he roared a couple of times, and I'm gonna tell you what, it made the hair stand up on the back of your neck. And when the sun got up, he had gone off, and we found paw prints, and it looked like that they were huge. He was out scouting for dinner, but he didn't get us. And we had time or two when we were doing that, we had snakes crawl through, and we smelled so bad. We smelled like the ground. I had one go across my legs and go on out into the bush, and all the creepy crawlers and stuff, that spiders. They had some kind of little spider there that was about that big, and it could jump 20 feet, just like, which scare you. And of course, another thing guys may have said, we had what we call wait a minute vines. If you're busting jungle on the track, you got a flak jacket on. We didn't wear all the ammo pouches and all that like an infantryman. Normally we had the flak jacket, our pistol holster, and a couple of magazines in a small pouch, because you can't get down in the turret and move around with all that junk on. We were busting jungle, and these vines would grow down, and they'd have a spike about like that on them. And if you weren't paying any attention, it would hook that, they'd dig into your flak jacket and pull you off the track with the track moving. And so you'd hear them going, wait a minute. That's where that thing come from.
All right. Now, you talked about when you were back in AIT, or after that, you did training to be a scout.
Yes.
At that point, what were they actually teaching you at that point?
Okay. Primary mission for a cavalry scout is to observe and report. That's what we're there for. My first commander, when I was still enlisted and had the scout, everybody had to have a little notebook and something to write with, except when you're in the shower or in the water bathing yourself. Other than that, you had no excuse. You might not have your shirt on, might not have your boots on, but you need to have something where you can write it down so that you can report it, because cavalry is the eyes of the unit.
Right.
You hear the term economy of force. When they can't commit a big army unit, they'll send a cav, because most cav units have more weapons and equipment for the size unit it is than an infantry company or a straight tank company, because the fact that they'll send us, go look on the other side of that hill and tell me what you see. And of course, depending on the mission, you're going to ride part of it, then you're going to dismount, and you're going to get over there, and you may be crawling on your belly, but then you need to write down, go back, report that to the higher ups.
Okay. Now, it seems a little surprising to me in your story here about how you're a tanker. You're riding around in a tank, but at certain points, you get dismounted from the tank, and you're going out there on foot.
The cav platoon had 3 tanks.
Okay.
And the 7 personnel carriers, 4 of which were scout vehicles.
Yeah.
They had a 50 on the cupola, and they had M60s on the side. So it was a fighting vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
During the time that we were there, you might be on the tank as a loader,
Okay.
and then get pulled off there. And now you're a machine gunner on it. So you bounce back and forth
Okay.
between those pieces of equipment.
Okay. So
and
all of you can do pretty much any of the jobs.
That was a plan. Probably the one group that only did what they did was the mortar crew, because they had just enough guys to drop rounds
Right.
and adjust fire and stuff.
Okay.
But within the unit, because normally where we're at, there ain't nobody else.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like you're part of a big battalion where I need another tanker over here for this
Mm-hmm.
crew, and you can go borrow one from
Mm-hmm.
another company. They would normally send you out either a platoon operation or a troop operation. A line troop, our troop, you had 3 platoons in each troop, and each platoon had its own. There were 3 mortar carriers, 1 each, and there were 9 tanks and 21
Right.
tracks. And that changed a little bit when we went to the Bradleys, but it's still kind of that same situation.
Okay. All right. Now, so you're basically in Vietnam then from sort of the fairly early in '69
Yeah.
Into '70. Okay. And you were spending most of the time, were you based in the same area then?
Well, we
Once-
made that big move.
Yeah, I made it Fenty, that area. And
Yeah,
then-
we left Pleiku area where Black Hawk Firebase was, went down south, and then moved the vehicles and to Fayette, and then we back up north, and we came up Highway 1. Charlie Troop, we had the Squadron headquarters troop was in Fayette. That's where the aviation troop was,
Yeah.
Delta Troop. And then Charlie Troop dropped off about 25 kilometers out of there, and then we were about 35 kilometers
Yeah.
north of there, and then A Troop, and then the Squadron flagpole was in Van Rang, which is an Air Force base. So we had that area
Right.
as our responsibility.
Okay. And then did you stay in that area for the rest of your time in
Yes.
Vietnam?
I mean, we moved mostly west
Yeah.
to do our missions, because on that area, if you went just into Cambodia and stuff, that's part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail group of
Yeah,
trails. And they were just fixing to kick off that attack over into Cambodia
Yeah.
and stuff. And I think that was why I got that 1 week drop that got me home a little bit earlier, because they didn't want to take real short timers,
Yeah.
short timers, for that extension thing. But the cavalry troops led the way on that. And so I can remember they shipped me up to Quin Yon, and that's where we. That's not it. Anyway, they shipped us up to where Nha Trang, and that's where we flew back to there in Cameron Bay, back to the States, back to the world.
Okay. Now, when you're out there doing your patrolling and so forth on your various missions, I mean, did you get into any large-scale firefights, or did they stay away from you?
We got in quite a few firefights. I don't know if you call them large scale.
Yeah.
If we ran up on Charlie doing something it was interesting, our primary mission was to report it so they could bomb it with B-52s or an airstrike or a large operation. Time or two we worked with the 1st and 5th Mech, because they were mechanized, they could keep up with us, but we would lead. If we got into something, sometimes that was pretty ferocious, but we had our own Cobras. We had our own gunships. And so it was like, call the fire department, and those guys would be up there pretty quick. We had, because our squadron flagpole was in Van Rang Air Force Base, we had great opportunities with Air Force close air support. We were backing up the 101st because one battalion of the 101st was based in Fayette as part of that shift of troops that brought us down. And they had a mission going off on a beach up north of us, and they had sent us up there to back that up. And I can remember sitting up on the tank, and I could see the ocean out here, and it was, I don't know, 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and there was this massive lightning flash. I'd never seen so much out there, and I thought, dang, because I didn't see clouds like a storm. And in about 2 or 3 minutes, it sounded like 900 airplanes went, just this scream sound, and then boom, 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 up on a mountain ridge about 4 miles from it. It shook the tank. And we found out later that that was the New Jersey battleship.
Okay.
Over the horizon, we didn't see the gunship or nothing. We just saw the flash, but they had a fire mission over there about 4 or 5 miles past us. And that was pretty impressive.
Right. How much contact did you have with Vietnamese people, either military or civilian?
Where our fire base was there in Long Son, there was a little village, the Long Son. The base was off, the fire base part was off on the side of that. And we'd go down in the village. They loved us to come down there and buy food. And, you know, sea rations got old really fast. And so we'd go down there and eat some of the Vietnamese food. And it was interesting. They spoke enough English to communicate with us. And they had, it was like they already knew what we were going to be looking for. Of course, you know, they'd been fighting for so long, even before we got there, that they kind of were aware. And we were the good guys because we were so close to them, they didn't want to do any stupid. Now, I think when we got overrun, I think they had some NVA, BC in there because the accuracy they hit some of those tracks with the mortars, they had been stepped off.
Yeah.
And now up north, we interacted with a lot of the mountain yards. They're easiest way to describe them is they're like American Indians to us, but they wore coarse burlap sack like skirts, but most of the women in the summer, they don't wear shirts, and that was kind of a eye-popping moment. But they appreciated us because they weren't interested in the VC communist junk. And they would come point, tell us, not me, but the commanders and stuff. And they had some pretty good food too. Yeah. Lizard, they'd cook it up, and we had some interaction with some Korean troops a couple of times. And if we inadvertently killed livestock, a water buffalo, the government paid a lot of money for them apparently. The Korean guys, they could make some steaks. So if we were on a mission like that and something like that happened, we looked forward to it because they grill those things. Like I said, sea rations got old pretty quick.
And what impression did you have of the Korean soldiers?
Very serious. Their NCOs barked, and buddy, they would jump. They didn't, when we weren't actively in a mission, even if we were doing maintenance or cleaning weapons or something, we'd yak. Oh, I heard from a girlfriend, you know, that kind of stuff. I didn't see that with them. And of course, I don't speak Korean, but they always seemed like they were all about business. And they appreciated us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we had a little operation where we had actually ran into some Australians, literally just in passing. And of course, my dad, when he was in the British Eighth Army, he worked with what they call the Anzacs, Australian New Zealanders. And I wanted to say something to them, but it was just in passing, you know. But it's all of this. I turned 20 over there in May, and when I left to go to Vietnam in that airplane from Dobbins, I'd never been any farther west than Mississippi. It was just like, wow. I did not get R&R because of an operation that came up when I was scheduled to go, and I was wanting to go to Australia because my dad had talked about them so much. In fact, I got a can. It was a cigarette can, a round can, had a pull-off seal top, and you had cigarettes in it. My dad smoked. I never have, but that's where he put all these little collar brass, hat brass, that different units, they'd trade them in World War II. And he had a whole can of those from different units, but they're all British unit, British, New Zealand, or Australia. Yeah.
All right. So I was going to ask you, have an R&R, but you answered that question. Okay. Did you yourself get wounded while you were over there?
I got blown off a tank.
Okay. How did that happen?
I went in country April Fool's Day, and we immediately left on a mission. We had hunkered down in this area for close to the evening, and we never were exactly sure, but we do know that an RPG was shot at us, and it hit that 50 mount right in front of me. Shrapnel went this way, but the blast blew me off the track. I was just sitting up there on guard. Guys were down there fixing chow, and I mean, we had kind of powered down for the night. Of course, everybody immediately reacted in the circle and fired up. And I when it went boom, I woke up in a medevac. But the blast is what got me. My flak jacket was pretty peppered, but nothing got through to knock holes in me. I got one little spot on my arm, but they medevaced me, and from the flash, I assume I couldn't see for about 24 hours.
Okay.
And I was at Nha Trang at the field hospital up there. And when they checked me out, like I said, it was a day or two, I could begin, everything started being normal. They took me up, and I hitchhiked helicopters back down to the squadron. And that was all in the first month I was there. And I've thought about it, but I kind of figured, like, okay, you had your shot, you didn't get me, I'm all right, I'm gonna make it. And I don't think about that all that much. I was very thankful that they moved that 50 up here and not down in here, because then it would have hit me. But we when we were busting jungle, sometimes if we ran in on some unit, they would shoot RPGs at us, because they would penetrate any of the personnel carriers. They were aluminum, depending on where they hit the tanks, and they usually aim at the cupola and the crew, because you ride up, except for the gunners usually down in there, and the loader. If you're running on highway, and there was paved highways over there, if we were doing a convoy move or something, the gunner would stand in the loader's hatch. There was a seat down there. He'd stand on that. The loader would sit up behind it on the hatch cover and he would look, his observation would be to the left and back. Commander, tank commander in the cupola would be, this is his area, and the gunner would be in there just filling in. If something happened, he would drop down, get in the gunner seat, the loader would drop down, and you'd drop down, and your primary mission is launch that big bullet or that big shotgun. If it was small arm stuff, we had the 50 cal up there. We had M16s that stayed up on top. Even tanker weapon was an M3 grease gun because of the size of the M16 or M1s. So that was a weapon going back to World War II that it was still a great weapon. I wish I had one. But we got M16s. We ran across a couple AKs. We had them up there on top, and we just put them on top. And if something happened, and it was full automatic. The 113s, you had the 50 cal, you had the two M60s, and they usually had an M16 or two strapped up there, so if something came up right behind you.
Yeah. Now you talk about busting jungle. Would you actually use the tanks like bulldozers and just plow through?
Well, not bulldozers, because you're not messing with the ground, you're above it. But you knock down, you can knock down a tree about like that without doing a whole lot of damage. I can't remember if we knocked down any big trees, because obviously if you hit something too hard, that's coming down on top of you.
Right.
But in some of the areas, it was mostly brush, and there were small trees and the vines and stuff, and you'd kind of beat it because a personnel carrier just didn't have the oomph to do that, and the way that their gun shields were, there was no protection for it, and the gun barrels would get tangled up, but the bad part in an armored unit or a cavalry unit like that, or even a mechanized unit, if you're in the jungle where you're having to knock stuff out of the way, that's going to restrict turret rotation, gun rotation, and make your repelling fire less effective, because you can't necessarily get that thing over there that fast, or the main gun's not going to knock a tree down, and you're not going to be able to get it over there. If it was really thick stuff, we used a 90 millimeter canister to make a trail. It was like a monster shotgun.
Yeah.
And somebody asked me one day, well, what do they look like? And I said, well, if you've ever seen a roller bearing on a front wheel hub, about like that, it had 1,100 of those in a 90 millimeter round. They were just stacked in there, and when you fired it at about 20 meters, it was about 25 meters wide, high, and it would clear brush, and it would do a number on anybody hiding in it. And most of what we carried was canisters.
Yeah, because you didn't have any tanks to shoot at.
Not at that time. There were some areas where they had built up bunkers in the mountains, and for that we usually carried 2 or 3 white phosphorus. We call them Willie Pete rounds, but they're kind of scary because if they pop open, they're gonna get on you. It'll burn you too. And we had during the time I was over there, they had, for the 90, they had an HE round.
So high explosive.
Yeah, and that was what they used for non-armor vehicles during World War II when that weapon was designed. And you could knock a hole in a bunker with that. The white phosphorus was basically to start a fire and suppress, because once those go off, you can't breathe that. It's not good for you. But most of our firefights, unless it was one of those, this is an attack we're going to execute, were 5 and 10 minute vigorous, every man for himself, get it done fights. And then they would take off.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't stand and pitch with us. They hit us in that fire base because, number one, we couldn't maneuver. Number two, by not maneuvering, that made all of those vehicles way more susceptible. Plus, with them being able to just run through the wire and throw those satchel charges, they can do a lot of damage. Because even if they just flopped a satchel charge up on top of a personnel carrier and it didn't go down inside, it would knock the gun shields off and that kind of stuff. So it'd still do a lot of damage. Radio antennas were fiberglass. So those kind of blasts, and all of a sudden now you can't communicate from inside that thing.
Okay. Now, thinking back over that year you spent in Vietnam, are there other particular memories or things that kind of stand out for you that you haven't brought into the story yet?
Well, one of the things that when I was a kid growing up, I was very enamored with pilots from World War II, the fighter pilots, the bombers and stuff. I read a lot of stories about fighter pilots in Korea, Air Force guys. So when I got over there, when we were in Pleiku, they were still flying A-1E turboprop fighters right out of the base. And I saw a couple of those react to an attack. They just took off and went and started bombing. They didn't even pull their landing gear up. But I noticed some patterns when we got calls for fire from the Air Force. The F-100s, which is what was primarily over there, those guys would get down. Actually, they were supporting us on a mission once and knocked about 4 inches off one of the tank's antennas. That's how low they were. And they were kind of, I always thought of them like these old veterans, they know they'd get up after they'd drop their ordnance and get ready to leave, and they'd do a loopy-loop for us or wag their wings. The F-4 was coming in, and it didn't have guns on it. They actually had to make a pod later for that. And those guys were like by the book. So I used to use this example. We get a F-100 unit coming in and doing fire support for us. And when they were done, they'd just do these lazy loopy loops and fly off. And that's like saying bye. The F-4 guys, it was like, nick, nick, very precise, very. So those, to me, those were all new pilots. The F-100 guys have been doing it for a while. And they'd come in there really good. And of course, in Desert Storm, we had the A-10, and that was such a magnificent aircraft. For any troops that fight on the ground, you want A-10s around because they can do amazing stuff. But it was that. I remember a couple of times when some donut dollies came out on a resupply chopper, and you'd see a white girl, pretty in a dress, and you're like, oh, wow.
And these are Red Cross volunteers, right?
Yes, yeah. We called them donut dollies because usually they had donuts. We went back in to pick up a convoy and bring back out, and we stayed over one night at Fan Rang at the Air Force Base, and they had a theater there. It's a working Air Force base. Guys had normal shifts, very different to our life, which was 24/7. So we went to the theater that night, and sirens went off. The Air Force guys just tore out of the theater. I didn't know where they were going. They were going to their bunkers and whatever. So we stayed in there until the film ran out. And you can still hear some sirens and a few small arms. And I can remember we went back and we told the first sergeant what had happened. He said, look, if you do that, you stay in that theater. If you run out there, you're liable to get shot by the Air Force guy because they get all freaked out. They don't normally do that. They go their shift fixing airplanes, and all of a sudden now they got bad guys on the ground, and they're anything that moves they shoot at. It was a very different environment back there. You know, it was 8 to 5 for them. They got to sleep in a bed every night, and clean clothes every day, and very different.
Yes.
It was, to me, it was kind of like being an old cowboy living on the frontier for us. We'd get resupplied, like Thanksgiving, they flew a Huey out with a Mermite can, which they had food in, and it was Thanksgiving dinner, and turkey and dressing and stuff, which was just like so amazing. Christmas, we got that. Chaplain would come out some. It was interesting. 69, the Atlanta Braves, because they didn't become a team. They came from Milwaukee in 65. I was a huge baseball fan. They made the playoffs, first playoff, and they were playing the amazing Mets.
Yes.
And AFVN radio would broadcast the games the next day. Of course, we didn't know it was the next day, and so my mom sent me a transistor radio, and I can remember on guard duty when our platoon was in the Firebase, there was a hill over there. They would put 3 of us up there in a Jeep, and we were overwatch. We could see everything going around the Firebase, and we'd sit up there and had that Jeep, that transistor radio, picking up the Braves and the Mets. And unfortunately, the Braves didn't win that year, but it was exciting because that's the first time they'd made the playoffs.
Oh yeah.
And I remember that so much. The moon landing. we heard about it on the radio that they'd landed on the moon. We didn't even know they'd shot them up, you know. I didn't actually see it until 1979. No. Yeah, 79, at the end of the decade. I was watching something, and they were going back with all the things that happened during the 70s, and I got to see it for the first time. You know, the bouncing around on the moon and stuff.
Okay, so we've gotten toward the end of your Vietnam tour. Now, as you got short and getting close to the time when you're scheduled to leave, did your duties change at all, or did your attitude change?
Well, I got promoted to sergeant.
Okay.
Pretty much we did the same thing until we did some missions right before it was time. I didn't realize that they were just some press to get everybody kind of focused on the big Cambodia push. That information had not come down to our level. I'm sure the commander and that they knew about it, and they were looking at what are we going to do with these guys that are within, I think, 30 days of deployment and of going home. And of course, when you're a short timer, you get real tentative. You bring up a good point about this. One of the things about Vietnam that I've often wondered why there wasn't more discussion of this. Robert McNamara was Secretary of Defense. He had come from Ford Motor Company. Vietnam is the only major conflict we've ever had that was individual replacement.
They did it in Korea too.
Well, like I said, I'm not familiar that much with that. But in 65, 66, they moved several units over. Our Cav squadron went in country. They were called the boat people because they went over as a unit. After that, it was individual replacement. And I was, especially when I became an officer, I thought about this a lot. Think about D-Day. All of those units knew what to do. And it was a huge sacrifice, but they did their job.
Mm-hmm.
If they hadn't, if they had had to have that individual placement to create those units, would it have been as effective? And people, what are you talking about? Well, if you're part of a ball team, football, baseball, you want to practice with the other players, so you all know that this is the strength of this guy and the weakness of this guy, so you can cover for it. When I went in country, they called us FNG. I'm not going to say what the words were, because you're a new guy. Or they'd talk about, yeah, you got jet fuel falling off your uniform. You didn't know anything. You didn't know the people per se. You'd never gotten in a PC and spent hours and days in it. So they didn't trust you. They didn't want you to make a mistake. After 30, 60 days, you became part of the team. They know you. And then as you got close to the short time, the last 30 or 45 days, you didn't want to be doing anything that was going to get you hurt because you want to go home. I wondered how that affected, for me, that middle time was great. I fit in. I knew the people. We did a good job. I remember in the beginning, I got passed around on 2 or 3 different tracks because they didn't. Well, we'll put you over there on the infantry track today and let's see what they do. That was what they said, but it was, we don't want the new guy up here up front. And then the short timers, guys we want to protect the short timers. So that's always kind of stuck at me, that because McNamara thought an individual soldier is like a spare part, you can just bolt it on. Well, it doesn't work that way. I mean, it did, but think of how much better it could have been if it was a team.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole lot of different pieces that go into why they were doing it.
Oh, I know.
So we can have a great conversation off camera about that. But but you're getting short, and so your attitude is shifting a little bit. But they're also, the guys within your unit on some level also want to keep you out of trouble.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And as it is, the powers that be are saying, okay, this guy is getting short, so we don't want to take him off into Cambodia, so we're going to send him home a few days early.
Yeah.
Okay. So you get to the end of that tour now. How do you get? So you mentioned you went to Nha Trang and then
to
Cam Bay.
Cam Bay was where we actually got on the airplane. I flew Flying Tiger out because I'd never heard of them to Vietnam, and I'm trying to remember. Anyway, it was a charter.
Right.
No, there were no compartments. It was one big long plane inside. We flew from there, Cam Bay, to Fort Lewis, Washington. We deplaned there. I think we took a physical there. It was a couple of little things like that. And then because of Easter weekend, they came in, brought us all into the big assembly area there. It was probably about 50 guys in this particular one. And they said, if you want a Class A uniform, we'll have you fitted for those on Monday, because the civilians were on leave. He said, or if you want to just get on home, we'll authorize your orders to travel in duty uniform. How many of you want to do that? 100%. They took us down to, I can't remember which airfield we went to. Airport.
So SeaTac probably, if you're Fort Lewis. So SeaTac, Seattle, Tacoma?
Yeah. That's it. And we flew from there to Chicago for me. And then in Chicago, I had to change planes to go to Atlanta. The trip to Chicago, plane was pretty full, and there was a lot of us. So it was kind of no big deal. But from Chicago to Atlanta, there was only 4 of us on that plane, military. and the stewardesses were just incredible. They put us up in first class, and like I said, they'd come up and sit with us and visit, and guys that were heavy drinkers got plenty to drink, and we got first class food versus the back. I have flown since then. Well, I was still in the military, but I'd fly in civvies, and a guy would get on in a uniform in more modern times now, and they get an applause, and we didn't have that.
No, you didn't.
But stewardesses were good to us and made us feel welcomed, and it was Delta coming down, and I've been in the airport traveling in uniform and out, and the modern era people, they clap when a group of you, it's just different.
Certainly. Okay. Before we go on to getting all the way home, I want to back up. There's a couple of standard questions I'll ask about Vietnam because people have a lot of stereotypes and assumptions about it.
Right.
One of them has to do with race relations. I mean, what kind of ethnic mix did you have in your troop, and were there any racial issues?
I grew up in Georgia.
Yes.
In the 50s and 60s. Being around blacks was no big deal because my grandfather was a lawyer, my mom's dad, and my grandmother had a nanny, a black maid. Her name was Maggie. She basically raised me because Mom started teaching school when I was about 3 years old. And she said, "I whip your little bottom, or I just love you up, whatever is necessary." And if I try to run away from her, she's fast. And I can think about it, and I can hear her. She had a kind of a cackle laugh. I love that woman. Her color didn't matter. Most of the people I knew growing up when I did, color was not that big a deal. The politicians made a big deal out of it. And there were certain people that were butt heads, not to use a bad term, that made a big deal about it. We had a tank driver in our platoon, and we called him Pops because he was like 2 days from being too old to get drafted and got drafted at 27. Yeah. He was tank driver. He's great, good guy, He got nicked up in one of the fights, and we were afraid we were going to lose him, but he came back and finished out his tour. When I was at Fort Knox, after AIT and I was doing that scout training, I had a little more freedom. I could actually walk to the PX and do some stuff. I had more trouble with Puerto Ricans. They traveled in gangs, groups, and they wanted to bully everybody. If you and a buddy were walking to the PX and you'd see 5 or 6 of them, you'd just cut them a berth. Never had any trouble with blacks. Okay. We'd have an argument, but it wouldn't be race. It would be, you got the last can of beans, that kind of stuff.
Okay.
That was no big deal.
All right. And the other thing has to do with drug use. I mean, people assume, everyone over there is doing something or whatever.
There were guys that did it. But I can remember not the platoon sergeant that came in after Sergeant Stevens. He'd look them right in the eye and he said, if you're out there on OP, observation, usually out in a foxhole with a radio, and he says, you do anything like that, if they don't kill you. I have never smoked other than if somebody has a baby and they give me a cigar, I'd puff it 2 or 3 times, I'd end up chewing on it. So there was no chance that I was going to smoke any weed, and I still have never smoked. I just didn't like that, and I would see guys that had toked up, and they were a little bit goofy, and I thought, I don't need to be like that here. I mean, I wasn't going to do that when I got home, and I had to worry about somebody shooting me. But there were a few guys that I think they did it, but they hid it pretty well, because we were always out there amongst the bad guys.
Yeah.
And it was just stupid.
Yeah, you had to keep your head.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Okay, so we steer you back. So you land in Atlanta, you're coming back. Now, had you been discharged? Did you still have time left on your enlistment?
Oh, I still had 2 years
2 years.
almost.
Okay. All right. So how do you get home?
I rode the train, the bus, from the Atlanta airport up to where it ended at Lenox Square and that was in DeKalb County. There were no cabs at that particular time. And like I said, this was Easter Sunday, so there was probably some cabbies that were off. So I just started walking.
And how far was it from the bus
about
stop?
15 miles.
Okay.
And when a couple of cars would go by, I'd never hitchhike, but I'd stick my hand out there, and they would just look at me and drive by. I'm in my jungle uniform. I've got a tan. It's March, I was freezing. And I had my duffel bag with me. And I had this old guy in a pickup after walking, I don't know, 3 or 4 miles, 5 miles. He pulled over, and I got in the truck, and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going home." "Where's that?" I told him it's Oak Grove Road. That's where Mom and Dad lived, in Decatur at that time. And he said, "Where you come from?" I said, "Vietnam." He said, "Okay." And he took me to within about 3/4 of a mile. He said, "I got to go down here and take a ride. I'll let you off at the corner," which was no big deal. He didn't say a whole lot, but I took his silence as respect, because he could tell I was tired, from the plane ride and everything. And got to the house, and never locked the house. It was just kind of out there in the country, and opened the door. And when I was growing up, we had dachshunds, and they got one whiff of me, and I got mugged by 2 of them. They were just all over me. It was fun loving on them too, because I'd think about them, And I went. My dad, every day of my life, made a big pot of coffee, big old percolator. You could hear that thing chugging, And the first cup, every day, he would take to Mom in bed. She'd get up, finish her coffee, get ready, go to teach school. And so there was hot coffee still in the pot. I went and got some of that. I hadn't had any of that good old coffee, I was like, Mom and Dad were at church, and I thought, I need to clean up. And I got in. We had a shower, but they had an old cast iron, old-fashioned bathtub. And I thought, man, I'm going to take a bath. Because most of the time, we had a couple of showers in the little Firebase. But if you were out in the bush, you look for a little pond to crawl in, and it may be yuck, but it's cleaner yuck than what you are, But I got in that thing and soaked, and when I got out and drank the water, it's bathtub green. And my mom hated that. And I thought, man, I got to clean that or she'll get me. Because there's so much dirt that just gets in your system. And I was sitting there, and I heard Dad and Mom drive up in his pickup. And I went out and opened the kitchen door and said, "Hey, you gonna fix some lunch or something like that?" And she ran and cried and stuff, and it was pretty special.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Now you still have 2 years left in the Army, so what do they do with you?
After my leave, I had to report back to Fort Knox, and I went to the 5th of the 32nd Armor that had M60A1s, which is mechanically laid out. It's a M40, same gun and so forth, although the rangefinder is a little bit better. And I was assigned there, and that unit's job was to provide training assistance for armor school for young lieutenants and NCOs. So basically I ended up being a tank driver, and I had a tank that I was totally responsible for all the maintenance. So we'd have a gunnery event. We'd go out, motor march the tanks out, and an NCO would ride there, and then I stayed with the tank. They'd go back to the unit. Then the bus would show up with the young lieutenants or whatever, and then they'd get on and they'd all shoot the guns and load. And then during the changeover from drivers, I had to hump the ammo so they could shoot it. And then when their training was over, they'd all get on the bus and drive back to the school, and I had to clean everything up, do the maintenance, and I spent the night with the tank. Usually we have a tent and a cot there with it, and then the next day another class would show up. It's a tough job because a tank's got a 4-man crew, and all of a sudden I'm the 1-man crew. But the fun part was we would do maneuvers toward the end of the class of basic training, and then the advanced class where captains would come. And of course I was a buck sergeant, and so I had to salute everybody. But I would drive, and they'd go do maneuvers and firing and stuff. And the lieutenants would really listen when I'd say, "Don't shoot from here." I'd say, "This is not a good place. Let's get right over here." And they'd listen to me. The captains, about 50-50. Some of them didn't want you to, shut up, But that was kind of fun. I did that for about 6 weeks, and then I got a back at the company unit, back to the first sergeant there, had handed me this paper and said, "Looks like you're fixing to ship to Germany." And I'm like, "No, I don't want to go to Germany. I just came back to the world." Over in Vietnam, this was the world. Yeah. That's what everybody called it. And I thought, no, because right after I got back, I had saved up some money, and through the PX system, I bought a Dodge Challenger TA. If I had that thing now, it'd be worth $1 million. They only made 5,000 of them. It was a 70 Challenger with the 3.2s, and it was.
So had you sold your Barracuda?
I gave it to my brother.
Okay.
And he didn't make a payment or two and lost it. But between that 69 Barracuda and that Challenger, those are two classic cars that would be worth a ton. I saw that lime green yuck color 70 Challenger TA automatic sell on one of those auctions for $900,000.
Wow.
Mine was a 4-speed. It was amazing car. I'd bought it, got a big discount and a tax break buying it through the PX. So I was get out and drive around with that thing, had fun. I'd go to Louisville all the time when I had time off, and met a girl up there, and we played some together. It was too much fun to be here at Fort Knox, because I was familiar with Fort Knox. So when he gave me that notice, I said, "What can I do to not do that?" And he said, "You can go to drill sergeant school." I said, where do I have to go for that? And he said, you can do it right here. First Army School's there at Fort Knox. And I said, what do I got to do to sign up? And he says, I'll get the information together, and you've got to go over to the drill sergeant school and talk to the instructor, and they evaluate you, pre-screen you. So I went over there. Command Sergeant Major, E9. He was a black guy. Sharp, I mean, in his fatigues, but they were perfectly starched back then. I mean, he was the commandant of the school. He had actually gone through the Marine Corps drill instructor course. He was one of the very first drill sergeants, and that's why he was running that school. And he asked me, how much time do you have left in your enlistment? You know, I think he had all that information, but and he asked me 2 or 3 questions about, are you going to be serious with this? You're training soldiers that are going to have to go through what you went through. Can you do that? And I was like, yes, sir. And he said, okay. We'll let your first sergeant know what our decision is. 2 days, I got the heads up. And I got a letter, orders that said I was reporting to the drill sergeant school the next Monday. And it was a 1-week pre-course. There was 60 guys. And every time you did anything wrong, everybody started with 1,000 points. Every time you did something wrong, they deducted points for it. And the last day of that pre-course, and they were showing us the manuals we'd have to teach about drill and ceremony and all that, and the PT stuff and all that. He got up there and he said, I'm going to post the scores today. You got to have 700 points to go to the course. And I can remember one day I did some little minute thing. He said, that's 10 points. But 1,000 points, that's no big deal. But when he said, you got to have 700 to go to drill sergeant school, the class went down to 20. You learned real quick. You had to have an extra pair of jump boots, because you had to break starch twice a day. When you went back for lunch to your barracks, you changed uniforms, put on a new uniform. You learned to iron. We had quartermaster laundry that was free for drill sergeants. So uniforms went off, they heavy starched them, and you got them back. And then you had to go back and press all the pressed in wrinkles out on your uniform. You couldn't wear a sweaty uniform. If you did PT in the morning, you had to break starch at lunch. You had to change boots at lunch. When you first get up there, they measured your hair. Just so many nitpicky things. It was 8 weeks long. When you were learning how to give commands, whether it's drill and ceremony, PT stuff, if you made the slightest little boo-boo in the official language, they would stop the grade session. He'd say, go to tree A, and you go to this tree in the group of A trees, and you bark commands at that tree till you got it right. And you'd see 8 or 10 guys out there barking at the trees, till you got the commands right, the verbiage right. And you had to learn how to have your command voice, and those kind of things. I think we graduated 10 out of the class. I was really proud of that. I was buck sergeant still. And they gave us our hats, and I still have it at home.
Are these the Smokey Bear hats?
Smokey Bear hat. It's actually a campaign hat that was issued during the World War I time.
Yeah.
But the Marine Corps went with that, and so the Army thought, well, we'll do the same thing. Except the Marine Corps doesn't wear it. Well, they didn't for a long time. have brass on it. We had the service cap thing on there. But it's something you get really proud of. Just, you know, and you get this badge in the Army that says, "This will defend." You wear it on your right front pocket. It's brass. And they later came out with a patch. The dress uniform is brass. And I found out that with the 2 years I was a drill sergeant, that's now a permanent award. I could wear it as an officer. And I got a lot of looks, like they'd see that "This will defend" badge, and they'd look at me like, "You're lieutenant. How's that possible?" I was actually, when we were doing the new equipment training for the Bradleys at Fort Stewart, I had my troop, which had 3 platoons of 4 Bradleys each. And then I had a South Carolina National Guard platoon, and I had a platoon from Mississippi. So I had 6 platoons. I basically had a squadron of Bradleys. And I was taking those guys through the new equipment training. I was the commander. And one of the NCOs that came to do the instruction part is the NET, new equipment training. First, I was wearing my dress uniform, and for the orientation, and I spoke to him for a few minutes, and I said, "Now, Sergeant Tompkins over here is going to take care of you guys," and I stepped to the back. When I turned around to walk off the podium, I saw him looking. He was looking at that, and I was standing down there, and then I had to leave for something anyway. Next time I saw him, I was wearing my fatigues, and I had this sewed-on patch. And we had guys doing a walk around and stuff, and he came over there to me and he said, "Where were you a drill sergeant at?" And I said, "Fort Knox." He said, "When?" I said, I gave him the dates, and he said, "You were in C Company, weren't you?" And I looked at him, and because I was a drill sergeant at C Company, C-16-4. He said, "I thought that was you." And I'm like, "Were you up there?" He said, "Yeah, I was a trainee in B Company." And I thought, wow. Now, he was a master sergeant. I said, "I'm sorry, I don't remember you." He said, "Oh, I remember you. I was goofing off when we were waiting to go to chow, and you got all over me and had me do push-ups and then do the run, dodge, jump and do the overhead bars and then stand there and apologize to the troop about talking in line." And when he said that, I remembered, because C Company's barracks was here. They were the big, like, apartment buildings. C Company was here, B Company was here, A Company was up here. And so we had a joint obstacle course in the middle, and you'd stand out there on line to go into the chow. And the ruling was from the battalion sergeant major that overwatched us. He said, "Anybody in that zone that's messing up, it's your responsibility to make an on-the-spot correction." So I don't know, I was tired or something, and I saw him over there, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and then he stopped, but then he started yakking again, and you're supposed to be quiet in line and keep distance. And so I eased over there, and he had turned around and was talking to somebody, and I locked his heels. I said, "You're going to give me 25 push-ups?" "Yes, sir, Sergeant." "Okay, run, dodge, jump." "All right, 1 row of the overhead ladder." "Thank you, drill sergeant." I said, "Now get back in line. Be quiet." You'd never think, you'd run into somebody like that, but that was quite a. He was good, NCO, with the net equipment and the troops. And
All right. So we're going to back up here. So you spend your last 2 years you're a drill sergeant at Fort Knox.
Yes.
That's your thing. Okay. Now at that point, did you decided it was time to leave the Army, or what happened?
Yeah, I wanted to get back and go to school, and I put in for an. They were giving up to 90-day early out, so I got 30 days. But the key is I had to go straight to school and pre-enroll. So I sent letters and got that done and went right back to Middle Georgia College. And I got accepted, and so I got that 30-day early out, went literally right straight to college. I don't know if you remember Callie, Captain Kelly, and that whole big thing.
Lieutenant Kelly, yeah.
Okay. That was happening right about that time. Okay. And I got down there when they were politicking for the college government, the student government offices. And there was a couple of Vietnam guys that were there, and I met them pretty quick because we kind of stood out. Number one, most of us had really short hair, and you carried yourself like a soldier and not the crazy hippie stuff, you know.
And you were a little older too, right?
I was, 21?
Oh, okay, not that much older.
Yeah, a little bit older, but a lot more wiser from just living life. And but one of those guys put my name down to run for the student body president. I didn't even know about it. And had the big assembly and to introduce the folks, and they called my name is running for the student body president. And I was like surprised, and one of them said, "Get your butt up there. You need to be up there." So I went up to the podium, and they introduced us, and then we got a chance to do campaigning for a week. And then we had another big assembly, and you gave a speech, and I was like, I can do that. Because when I was a drill sergeant, I taught a class in the history of the cavalry, all the regiments, and all that kind of stuff, for about 600 guys. The whole basic training would be in that one. And first time or two I got up there, I was like, but after a while I got where I could do it. And so I said, I can do this. But I wrote a speech and getting ready for it. And then when I got up there, I had listened to what some of the other guys said, and I was like, oh, this is stupid. So I got up there and I said, introduced myself. I said, I'm a Vietnam veteran. I grew up in Georgia. I'm excited to have served the country. I'm here now. I want to make my life good and help other people and stuff. And I talked about a few of the things, you know, this is where you decide what your career and your life's going to be right now as you're beginning. And something made me, in my pocket, I had the keys to that Challenger and a couple other keys on the key ring. For some reason, I just felt like pulling it out. And I picked it up, and I dangled it up by the mic, and I said, what you do here will create the keys for the rest of your life. You need to make a decision. And I said, I just pitched them. And the crowd was really quiet. And it went thud in the gym, big loud boom. And I said, the decision's yours. And I got down, and I ran away with it. I didn't expect it. I was thinking back when they said that I won. There were a lot of the professors, because several of mine were up on the rail that was around the up part of the gym. And they had stopped walking and talking, and they were standing up there watching and listening to me. So I got elected student body president, and got sworn in and had the officers for the student government. And this is when the decision came down that Callie had to go to prison. And those of us that have been veterans knew that he was following orders from above.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I did a lot of research later, and guess who else was in the chain of command of that in Vietnam? Colin Powell.
Mm-hmm.
He was the commander of the 23rd, that brigade, and but he got completely overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
All the blame came to that lieutenant. It wasn't right what he did, but there should have been some bigger heads rolled. And so there was this little protest going, and this was right before the election part.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody took a picture of me on the podium. I had my drill sergeant hat on, talking about it wasn't right what they were doing to Cali and so forth, and that got stuck up on the walls the day of the election. And you know, they said, vote for Conyers, he's right. And so I did 2 years there. I got my AA degree in history, and figured, you know, I gotta do something for a job, and I couldn't find much, so I was a security guard at a construction site. Big apartment complex was adding a whole nother wing, and I got that job. I was the night watchman, and I was working at a gas station right down the road, so I'd finish down there at the gas station, come up, put on my little rent-a-cop uniform, and I'd be there during the night, and they had a little place that I could snooze some, but you couldn't get in the property without going by me. And there was a police officer, DeKalb County police officer, that on his routine patrols, he'd come by there, and he was doing it with the guard that was there before me. And he'd come in and we'd talk, and he had a similar background. He'd been in the Army, didn't go to Vietnam, but he'd been in the Army. He's a young guy, and we talked, and he said, you ought to apply for the county. And I thought, wow, what is, and he'd tell me these stories, and I was like, oh, that's like being in the cavalry again. Mm-hmm. So I applied and got hired, and got sworn in, and that was in that was in 73, February of 73. Had to go to the State Patrol Academy for a month to get certified, because DeKalb didn't have their own school at that time. And we had 4 or 5 guys from DeKalb that went, so we got to be pretty good buddies. Came back to DeKalb County Police, and forevermore, amen, DeKalb County Police badge 753 is me. Mm-hmm. I have it. I don't carry it around, but I'm still very proud of it. And I patrolled in the Decatur, East Atlanta area a good bit, and I loved it. It was awesome.
So how long did you do that?
2 years.
Okay.
I did not realize how big the politics was and stuff. Thanksgiving Day of 73, there was a kid named Eric Brady, and his sidekick had been studying with some friends, and they were leaving that house. They were going to go to his mama's house for dinner. He was a senior in high school, but he was going to Georgia Tech as a freshman. Smart in physics, smart kid. They were in a Volkswagen Beetle, and he pulled out at this intersection of where Ponce de Leon and North Decatur Road. Ponce de Leon goes this way, North Decatur Road goes like that, and there's a median in that split. And he pulled out to get over here and go back this way. A couple of drunks riding in one of those old Buick Rivieras, big old tank, come flying through under. This is over near Emory University, so there was a curve, a railroad bridge, came over that and T-boned them. knocked the Volkswagen about 100 feet in a row. Killed Eric Brady immediately. There were some nurses coming from DeKalb General Hospital had just gotten off shift, saw the wreck, and they were climbing up in the car trying to help, and they had to revive the passenger about twice just to get him to the hospital. The driver of the Riviera had 3 DUI accidents, 1 with injuries, now with a fatality. So I handcuffed him and his partner to the vent windows on the car while I could go down and see what I could help with the wreck. He was charged with vehicular homicide and or manslaughter. And because back then we didn't have computers, you had to handwrite everything. You take it in, they'd type it, and it goes in the file, but the handwritten copy goes with it. So when the case come to court, I had to go and testify that, yes, this is my report, and this is why I arrested him, and these are the charges. I had to make that all legal. I went to court 6 times, spread out. And of course, you have to do that on your time off. So, sat in court all day from the call case, and they kept getting it put off. And I just finally was like, this spilled over into the 2nd year. I was like, I'm tired of this. That guy's never going to go to jail. So I'd been talking to a recruiter. I said, if I went back in, what would happen to me militarily? And he said, well, right now, because you're OOF, which is Drill Sergeant MOS, he said, they'd take you back right now. You probably go back to Fort Knox, and you definitely go back as a buck sergeant. It's been a pay raise since you were in, and you jump right in there and do that. I said, well, it kicked around a little bit, and I finally said, I called him up and I said, I want to do it. And I re-enlisted for 3 years. They were bringing guys out of Europe pretty fast. Volar was fixing to happen with Jimmy Carter, and that was not a super duper success in the beginning.
Yes, that's the all-volunteer military, which Nixon started. Let's be fair.
But
that was really happening while Carter was president. That was actually going on.
Yeah. And so I went to Fort Knox, went right back into the thing, and like I said, as soon as I got up there, I ran into my old first sergeant, except he was a sergeant major, and he brought a stack of papers down and said, I want you to fill those out after CQ and have them on my desk Monday. And we had that little conversation, and he said, on my desk Monday, and I'm like, Roger Top. And I thought it was to extend my enlistment, but it was actually an Army scholarship application. And I went back home for leave for something. Might have been when my grandmother passed. I was back home, and I went out to eat with a girl that I saw off and on, and I ran into one of my police buddies that had gone to the police academy with me, and he stayed at the Cap, and he was working for detectives at the time, and we had kind of an old home night, and I said, hey, whatever happened to the Eric Brady case? He said, I don't know. I don't remember. Let's go ask Peggy. Well, his wife worked in the recording room back then, and so we went up to the headquarters, and police headquarters, and it was so good to see her. But I asked her, I said, what's the status on that Eric Brady case? And she said, give me a few minutes. And she had to go file cabinet, and she brought it up here. And about 18 months after the accident, the case got dismissed. And the background, and Steve said, oh, yeah, I remember now. This guy's daddy played golf with a federal judge or something in Atlanta, and after that time, but when the accident happened, it was such a horrendous thing. That kid had such a future. Camp County had a traffic specialist where they go do the measuring and figure out speeds and stuff. Georgia Tech sent their whole physics department to help them.
Mm-hmm.
He was going 71 in a 35-mile-an-hour zone when he hit the kid. But that was the kind of closed that chapter for me.
Mm-hmm.
I love being a cop, but I just couldn't play by those kind of rules.
Yeah.
Went back in the Army, drill sergeant. I got word that I'd been accepted, and I had to choose school, and I went to North Georgia because it's one of the 5 senior militaries, which most people don't realize. The day West Point graduates in a year is the seniority date.
Mm-hmm.
The 5 senior military schools are one day afterwards, so West Point always has seniority.
Mm-hmm.
And then all ROTC is after them
Yeah.
by one day at least. Politics.
Mm-hmm.
So I went back to there. I enrolled in North Georgia. Because I had an AA degree, I didn't have quite as much material to do to get my bachelor's degree. I did have a falling out with the history department guy, so I had to change my major because he was my advisor at the time. So I got a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice, and got commissioned in June of '79. And I had been doing a little work with the National Guard drilling as an enlisted guy, and when I got commissioned, I was actually, I missed part of the graduation because I was off on a training mission with some recruits from North Georgia. So, but that started my officer career as a second lieutenant.
Okay, so where do they station you then? Or do you do an officer basic course first?
I went to officer basic course at Fort Knox, which I used to provide support for it, but it was fun, and it helped that I knew I could help some of the other guys that had no clue about a tank. Because for the officers, that is the basic course in armor. And for me, it was kind of old hat. We had newer equipment during that time. The M60 A1s had been upgraded. The M1 was in the beginning of some of the testing for the running gear and stuff, and the laser rangefinders and some of those things was happening. And I really enjoyed that. That was 8 weeks up there, and then I was assigned at Fort Stewart, 24th Division. And because I had been enlisted, and when I first came down there, I was an excess officer. So I didn't have a troop billet per se. And so because of the roundout program I'd mentioned, the 48th Brigade of the Georgia National Guard was a roundout brigade to make them full for the 24th Division. And they had the same equipment that we did. When the M1s came and the Bradleys came, the 48th Brigade got those. And the new howitzers when those came. So I went up there and worked when they did drills and helped work in that area up there with them until troop unit, and then I went back to the 4th Cav then at Fort Stewart, and I was there in that unit, and then I got transferred to Fort Irwin in the Op 4 for a period in the beginning of.
Now, you had told me about this off camera. So what's going on at Fort Irwin? What's there?
Fort Irwin is the National Training Center at Fort Irwin was set up so that you could use the new things, Miles, the laser tag for the Army. They had it for all the equipment. They could do it with a tank. They could do it with a soldier and a rifle. Sorry. And they had set that up so it was a place where, given what we had learned from Israel in all those Arab wars over there that they had, there was a lot of desire in the military to have a training area that's unique to the desert.
Yeah.
Because all the guys in Graf and all those places in Europe, the Fulda area, which is, you know, they were there to keep the Soviet Union out. There was no place where we could train guys for the desert with desert weapons, desert.
So Fort Irwin is out like California desert?
Yeah, Barstow, California is about 40 miles from the entrance to the, I mean, it's right up north of Barstow. It's the largest post in the United States. It's the only fort the Army has for training that you can fire every weapon but a nuke. I mean, you can use combat level CS gas. You can fire live tank rounds. You can use aircraft that they're trying to mix in, and they can use full up 500-pound bombs. I mean, they don't do it a lot, but you could. It's realistic in distance, weather, terrain. If we had to go to the Middle East or Iraq or someplace, which happened later. When Desert Storm started, when I was a commander, all of my guys had been through at least one rotation, and a couple of them more than that. So they'd played a home game. It was, so going to the desert was not new. It was just a different place. And the leadership in the military and Defense Department at that point realized that with technology zooming like it was, we needed the total effect, we needed a place to practice it, and we needed to use these weapons of high tech. You can't do it at Fort Stewart because too many civilians. You can't do it at Fort Benning because it's right outside of Columbus. So you wanted to be able to go and fight the war. Well, with using the Miles gear, laser tag, they created an OPFOR unit, opposing forces. They used modified Sheridans because Sheridan did, it was okay in Vietnam, but it was designed to shoot a missile out the gun, and it wasn't that effective. They modified those to look like Russian equipment because it was about the same size, small, and different things. I don't know that they ever said the source, but we ended up with a lot of real Russian Soviet Union equipment from the Israelis, probably from the Arab-Israeli war series. So we had real equipment that looked like the real bad guys would be fighting. And we'd wear a different uniform, and we would fight their tactics so that our guys who came out to be trained, it was basically you'd be out there for a month. And when they started doing it with the 48th Brigade National Guard, they were out there for a month doing that, and their ATs annual training went from 2 weeks to 3. And some of those guys were making a lot of active duty days for that. But we'd be the bad guys and they'd fight us. And it was great training. We had artillery guys, and they could use a little bit of gee whiz, but they could call in the fire mission, verify the location, and then they'd go out with Miles guns and kill your tanks, or, you know, like it was really being fired. If you got shot, you had a little card in your pocket to tell you what, okay, you got to lay down, you got a chest wound, you know. So then the medics would come up, they'd see the card, and they would simulate doing it. It was superb training. We had great leadership during that time. Schwarzkopf was at the 24th Division during that time, and he was very big on the 24th. Everybody had to go at some point. Sometimes you'd go, the next battalion would go, the next battalion go, you're back on the deck because there's a different artillery unit going and stuff. And that was intense. I loved that duty. And I got to go visit some of the California places and be thankful I didn't live there full time. The desert's nice. One of the things you find out, about the desert is it's not always hot and it's not always dry. Rain comes and it'll rain in the mountains, and by the time that water runs off that desert so fast, it'll float a deuce and a half away. I can remember in certain parts of the year when you'd think it would be still hot, when that sun comes up over the mountains in the east, it goes from cold, cool to hot. So you got to shred some stuff. But that same time when it goes down below those mountains on the west, you better find a sweater because it just goes straight to cold. And like I said, it would rain and like monsoon and these little wadis that everybody would hide in because you're out of eyesight would become raging rivers, you know. So it was really superb training for what we would see in Iraq and then later on. After that was over, I went to the advanced course for officers, captain's course. That was back at Fort Knox. It was, I think it was 10 weeks. And it would, part of it was teaching to be a company commander or a CAV commander. The other part of it was teaching how to be a staff in various type of jobs. I really learned a lot about operational stuff. And right before we deployed to Desert Storm, they moved me from commander. I'd had my couple of years with my guys to S3 of an M1 battalion,
and
operations officer.
Operations, yes. Okay.
And the training we had at that advanced course was great because commanders up here, he's working with the other commanders above him, and you know the theory, and it's great. It's actually right. You need to know what's going on 2 levels above you and 2 levels below you, and that way you become a valuable piece of the puzzle to make it work. And so I went in there kind of just like I was still a captain. It was a major slot, and we did, you know, Desert Storm, and basically the operations officer, the commander says, we want to go over here and take that little mountain. Operations officer says, okay, here's the battle plan. You're snapping the ball and you're the wide receivers. And you put that together and you execute it like the coach. I like that.
Yeah.
That was a good duty.
All right. Now, and of course, Desert Storm happens while you're with this unit,
Yes.
and your unit gets involved in that. So,
Right.
so talk a little bit about that. What the 24th Division? What role do they play in Desert Storm?
They were the only heavy division, that means armor and mechanized infantry, in the 18th Airborne Corps. So the initial reaction to Desert Storm was 18th Corps.
Okay. So basically, Iraq has invaded and occupied Kuwait, and
Yes.
then we start sending people over there. 18th.
Yeah, but they were,
Airborne
like
Corps.
I said, once they got in theater, they were on the ground.
Right.
Airborne's only in the air to get there.
Yeah.
Then they're infantry.
Right.
And Iraq was armored. They had Soviet, fairly modern Soviet tanks and equipment. So there was a big push to hurry up and get the 24th over there. So the bulk of them jumped end of December. Some of us were left behind when that guard guys showed up that rounded out the 24th for their training to get them schooled up. The battle equipment went over there, and we used the National Guard stuff that was still at Stewart. And then when that happened, everything was over there. And then they started bringing units out of Fort Hood, the heavy units, and to get that extra plus up. And of course, the 24th was down there and did that end run around Kuwait.
Okay. So when do you actually get over there? Do you go to Saudi Arabia first? Is that?
We went in and linked up where the 24th or the 18th Airborne Corps area was, and then once we got married up with our equipment, we busted out to the west to get set up to make the sweep around.
Right.
Because we didn't want to get tied up in that trench stuff that was happening in Kuwait.
Yeah.
There was a whole lot of stuff that happened in Desert Storm because I was in that talk with my brain looking at a map or
And that's the tactical
talking on the
operations
radio.
center.
There was a lot of stuff going on. I didn't read it, know about it till I got home and read this is what happened. Because we were trying to make a fast move around the bulk of the dug-in Iraqis, get behind them, cut off the resupply, and then pick them off. And with the A-10s that came in, the Apaches that were first showing up there, some of the other GWIS electronics, couple A-10s could fly over and you'd have the Iraqis surrendering in mass because they'd seen what the A-10s would do, and of course the M1s was so superior to. The biggest thing was we could outrange with our 120 gun the Russian 125s, so we could stay out of range and plink them off.
And you, at that point, also had guidance systems, right? So
you could,
so basically, one of their tanks would just sort of blow up without them even knowing you were there.
Yeah, well, that was part of the A-10, the TOWs and missiles and launcher, and some of the ground launch stuff that the Air Force had. They could kind of hump it over the hill and hit a tank, and they'd still and see where it came from. The technology got really awesome. And then when we came back in March, April of '91, I went and finished working with the Guard, getting them back from active duty, reviewing stuff, and then I got the conversation that when I made major in '92, and they said, you're probably not going to make lieutenant colonel because you're too expensive. And I'm like, what? But with my enlisted time, I'd maxed out pay, and they had a bunch of young guys that were just entry level. Not that there was anything less with them. It was just cheaper, and they were trying to cut the budget. And so they transferred me to the IRR for a time. Which is? Inactive reserve.
Okay.
It's kind of a holding area because as an officer, President could call me back today. There's no age limit. It's not like enlisted where you sign a contract. And so you're in the inactive reserve. I thought about doing the reserve training, but then when I started driving the truck, I couldn't pick and choose between making money driving and doing a drill. So I stepped out, and I think I became officially out in like '95.
Okay.
I started driving the truck in the middle of '92.
Okay.
And there's some stuff because of the haste of getting everybody back and all this cutting budgets and stuff. There's some things I'm still doing some research on about. I might have lost a little credit, a little bit of money. That's something you go to the VA for, and they're slow. Plus, I'm 90% disabled.
Okay.
I got a PTSD bad. Most people don't realize if you are a combat soldier, you are so absolutely alert to smells, sounds, things like that. Somebody could knock a chair over. That absolute unknown sharp blow. I've jumped on the floor before. When I first came back from Vietnam, I took a girl out I went to high school with, and we went to see the movie Airport when it was in theater. Downtown Atlanta, we're standing in line to get our tickets. Garbage truck backfired. I dove over in some bushes, and the girl standing there with me was like, "What happened?" I said, I'm sorry. I heard that and I thought I was getting shot at.
Yeah.
I don't sleep more than about 4 hours. I take 3 sleeping pills a night. 3 o'clock I'm awake, and I can't. And that's part of that PTSD. Also, I've got a lot of Agent Orange. I've had 9 small surgeries. From stuff that it came from Agent Orange. And I think the COVID mess kind of stirred that up, because I didn't have a lot of problems with it until 21. I had COVID in December. It was about 8 days with the symptoms. But it took me about a month to feel normal.
Yeah.
And then went to the VA for some stuff, and they did a skin check because of where I was stationed and so forth. And they said, "Oh yeah, we need you." And they had little markers, circles all over me, you know. And they said, "We'll schedule you for surgery for these." I'm very fortunate that the surgeon is, she's now, the lady that did my first is the head of the department at OU University, and I'm going to drive down there for her to do it.
Yeah.
And there's some other things that I can't watch war movies.
Yeah.
I watched We Were Soldiers, which is an incredibly accurate movie. I mean, I watched the whole movie, and it was like, been there, done that. I didn't sleep a lot for about a month. There's a couple of others that I watched, and Search for Private Ryan is one, I think, that where they came on the beach.
Yeah.
It showed the World War II. My brother, while I was bouncing around, I had bought a double wide mobile home and had it when I was still living in Georgia, and he lived in it with a roommate while I was out driving truck till I ended up going to Oklahoma. They had gotten that movie, and when I was coming home for time off, they wanted to set it up so I could watch it, because Alvin's my brother, wanted to see what my reaction to how realistic it was. And so when they put it on, and I was watching the D-Day part, and he said, they were looking at me, he said, I didn't move. I didn't twitch. I didn't shift. I was so locked in to it. And of course, then after it was over, it was very, very realistic. I just couldn't sleep, you know. And so that's something I have to live with.
Yeah. At what point did you come to understand that this was all tied into PTSD?
When I first when I came off active duty, both times as an enlisted man for that break and then as an officer, I didn't go to the VA. When I was a kid, we'd go down to see my granddaddy at the old 48 VA hospital in Atlanta, and I would see all these old guys in the beds and stuff, and I thought, what they did for their country, I don't want to interfere with that. I want to help every way I can. When my dad was in the VA going through AA, but also he had a lot of health trouble from it. Same thing, World War II guys. So when I got out, I thought, I've got a job, I'm making some money, I got private insurance. I'm not going to disturb the VA so that the guys that don't have it have everything they need. When I got out as an officer, I was making pretty good money as a truck driver.
Yeah.
Same thing. I'm not going to disturb that. When I put in for my Social Security at age 62, because I started a little business and people hate the oil business. I lived in Oklahoma escorting mostly oil rig stuff. A lot of things dried up. With Biden, the president, I didn't run a single load for 4 years. So I went to the VA for the first time. And my first rating, I think, was like 20%. And then they would set up all these appointments to talk to this psychologist and the labs and stuff. And they finally have rated me at 90%, which is very, very good for us. But the rating system for PTSD is kind of very subjective. So when you read the government speak, they acknowledge I've got PTSD, but I'm not getting much of a rating for it. But we do fireworks at our church down there. I ran the security team. I was the commander. When we knew we were moving up here this last year, 4th of July 25, for the only time I've ever done it, I was a spectator. Usually I was running around busy and stuff. I was a spectator, and we were watching the fireworks, and they were awesome, and I was fine because I knew they were happening. But I walked over to the little vending area to get a bottle of water for me and my wife and one for my little dog that was with us. And a kid was right behind me, popped a firecracker, and I crashed into the counter. I can't not do that. It's just something, I hear everything. Wife and I were traveling one time, and we were staying in a hotel, and outside of our hotel room door was a motion-activated light. We'd laid down in the bed, and apparently somebody walked by. I heard the micro switch kick before the light came on. It woke me up. I can't not do that. I mean, I'd love to say off, and it doesn't work. The VA people I've been working with in Oklahoma are terrific. They're doing all they can do, but it's the levels above. It's all about budget. When Trump came in, he created the community care, which was massively good. The VA hospital down in Oklahoma City downtown is great, but you'd have to go there 2 hours early to get a parking spot. When he created that community care, they found a building, took over the top 2 floors, set everything up. I'd still have to go downtown for some specialized stuff, but my routine stuff, 5 minutes from the house. Huge. Instead of being a 3.5 hour, I can get it done in an hour. And with my wife being a vet, same thing. It's just, they care. And they go overboard to help. And she moved her stuff up here because she came up earlier and got her VA moved up. I haven't moved mine yet because I've got the absolute best primary care doctor I've ever had. She was in the Air Force as an MP. She went to Afghanistan, Iraq later on, got in firefights. So when I'm trying to explain to her things I went through
Mhm.
in combat, she gets it.
Yeah.
She understands. She's terrific. I don't want to give her up.
Mhm.
I'll drive 1,000 miles to see her. And that surgeon has been so overboard helping me with the surgeries so that I got a big old scar over here from the first one or second one on my arm where they had to cut some of the cancer coming out. And she stayed supervising after the surgery to make sure that all the stitches are done so I wouldn't have any kind of mobility issue.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. Okay.
that's kind of my story.
Yeah.
I'm very aware of the military and soldiers. I proudly wear my hat
Mhm.
so that if I see other veterans, most of the time I don't even get a chance to talk to them. We'll see across the room and just nod or wave, and it's saying, "I love you, brother. Glad you're home." That ain't silly to me.
No.
It's part of what makes America what it is. We care about our veterans. My brother had a heart murmur, so he couldn't go into service. He turned out being a real important guy. He was a missionary in Siberia and all those terrible places. He passed away in 2015, right after my mom passed. And so I'm kind of the last of the family. My dad died in '05. Mom died in December of 14. Alvin died in February of 15. I sold the house in Georgia, sold my place. I was in Oklahoma City for about 22 years, met my little Yankee wife, who's from here, there, Navy veteran. And she's 100% because she was stationed in Japan for 2 years. And in Japan, they don't have landfills. They burn everything. And where she lived, she was downwind, and she's got a big old long list of stuff she's allergic to. Cigarette smoke, polyester, perfume stuff. I can remember when we first met, we were at a surplus kind of store, and her two daughters knew to kind of screen for that. I didn't even know she had. And all of a sudden they hustled up and said, "We got to get her out of here and move her." And I'm like, "What's going on? What's going on?" And she said, "Look over there at that lady." And over an aisle over, this woman had cologne or something. Psst, psst.
Oh.
Psst, psst. And didn't even think about what the impacts is it for that.
Oh.
Anesthesia can go up to even to the VA, and the people standing right outside and smoking. We were over at the VA. I had an appointment. She did, and this guy, he must have been a massive smoker. She just walked by him, and we almost had to take her to the emergency room. It hit her so hard.
Wow.
So I have a great respect for the VA and those people.
That's kind of just a reminder of the different ways in which the service can do
well,
some damage.
I saw something the other day that somebody had posted that makes so much sense. They were talking about the dad, and he had served his country in Vietnam, and he had actually was a Desert Storm guy too, and he survived those, but when he came back, between the Agent Orange and the smoke, chemical stuff that he got over there, he died of that, and it was like it started in the war, and it just kept.
Yeah.
And it's so true.
Well, I'll tell you, the whole thing makes for a pretty remarkable story, and you do a great job of telling it.
Well,
so I'm going to close out this session by just thanking you for coming in and sharing a story today.
Well, I hope that somebody will see this and get something good out of it. And if they're veterans, go to the VA. Talk to those people. There are veterans that they're out and about. They call Walking with Warriors. If you've got an issue about suicide or depression or something, if you get in touch with them, they will contact whoever you need to see to help you. With the economy being all crazy these last 4 years, they will even help some with that. So the biggest thing is, if you're a veteran or you're married to a veteran, get in touch with the VA, tell them what the situation is, and they'll help you.
All right. Thank you for that. Okay.
Thank you.